Welcome, everyone. So today I'm going to spend a couple minutes and I'm going to talk about playfulness in higher education. So imagine you were a student in a class that was boring, intimidating, overwhelming. We've all experienced this at some point in our lives, just not getting out of a class everything that we could or we should. Now imagine you were teaching this class. What if you sensed your students lacked attention? What if you couldn't get them to engage and continually saw that deer in the headlights look? What would you do? I don't have all the answers, but I'd like to share some of the answers that have worked for me. So who am I?
My name is Jen Dewhurst, and I'm an instructor in the undergraduate radiation therapy program in the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry. Thank you for taking the time to join me today. So who am I? I'm actually going to start with who I'm not. I'm not the foremost expert. I am far from that. Who I am, though, is someone who's been brave enough to try some pretty neat things and someone who's learning along the way. I've been really excited to explore and to talk and to begin to develop a community of higher ed academics who are also trying some really neat things. And they're brave enough to explore and challenge themselves and the norm to improve the experience and depth of learning in their students. In my talk today, I want to spend some time sharing my story, some of the challenges I've experienced, and then how I've reflected, learned, and started to address them. I'll talk a bit about the literature and adapting a playful philosophy in higher ed, and I'll also offer you a few examples of how you might choose to begin to reimagine some of the activities you do to incorporate some new energy into your classroom. So, getting back to my story, my strength and comfort is with the clinical teaching and administration. That's where I spent the majority of my career, and I enjoyed it there. Fast forward to a return from maternity leave and COVID-19. So upon my return, I would be full-time in the classroom. The courses that I was going to take on were extremely content heavy and were actually pretty intimidating. It's far from what I would have considered fun.
So what was the situation? COVID. Quite an experience, just like I'm sure it was for all of you. So in 2020, like everyone else, I needed to figure out how to stay afloat. I had to focus on delivering quality content. That also meant adopting previous instructors' course activities and moving everything into an online forum. So after running my first full set of courses, I decided I could do better. I liked the progress that I had begun to make with the content and the structure. The activities, though, they just fell flat. So I decided I needed to reflect, to explore, and with the goal to develop the classroom I was excited to lead. So like I said, these courses were extremely content heavy. They were intimidating with a ton of memorization required. However, they were also foundational courses which bridge all other advanced courses in our program. So it was really important that the students learn them well. The content was also really challenging because there was often best care decisions, but not always clear-cut answers. So what that meant is I found that students had a really tough time engaging. They didn't want to offer opinions or potential rationales. Discussion was really actually difficult and often uncomfortable. Students seemed to lack confidence and had difficulty integrating previous knowledge into new situations. There appeared to be fear or hesitation holding them back from engaging. So the problem, like I said, these courses are foundational, not only for the program, but also for their chosen career. So I felt I really needed to redesign the structures and content to better support student learning, but also my classroom. I needed to address some of the social emotional aspects of learning to create an environment which encourages fearlessness and inquiry and safety. So this is how I began to challenge and develop my personal philosophies and my goal of developing that classroom I was excited to lead. So looking into pedagogy, there's a ton of information for activities which involve active learning. Many of them are fabulous. They encourage us to create activities which have students work with the content. And as we know, this improves comprehension and retention. Perfect, this is exactly what I need. But what it doesn't address is the social and emotional aspects of learning or creating safety in my classroom, which I believe to be fundamental to student success in my area of teaching. Because don't forget that heavy content and a ton of it. So as a result of my reflection, including anecdotal student discussion, I knew the attributes of the course the components of the course I needed to tackle. Students had difficulty engaging with the content because they weren't quite sure how to begin to use it, but they also didn't want to be wrong. So I understand these are fairly typical student behaviors. However, I needed to figure out a way to support them through this so that I could get through all of my content and ensure that fundamental learning was actually taking place. So this is how I became drawn to something that made perfect sense to me, but I knew very little about: ludic pedagogy, or playfulness in higher education. So higher education faculty strive to adopt pedagogical approaches that generate student engagement, motivation, and quality learning experience. Active learning and engagement is one approach, but it felt quite singular, more about the activities and not really a classroom ideology, which is what I needed. Something that could create the environment I needed to support psychological safety, to reduce fear, to create space for competition, to try and reduce that heaviness in memorization, to change the dynamic and motivation overall. So according to James and Rotzi, play can create an environment that's conducive to taking risks and experimentation that can lead to creativity and innovation. The play model focuses on creating positive, fun experiences while still maintaining academic rigor. That's really important. It's based on creating enjoyable educational situations so that students associate learning with positivity and engagement. So ludic pedagogy combines the related concepts of fun, play, playfulness, and humor to establish a context for positive, effective learning environments. A fun class supports intrinsic motivation, and students often will want to learn in that environment. Fun experiences are much less difficult for the mind to process. They carry a lower cognitive load. If students have fun in higher education, it benefits their education by means of motivation, well-being, and improved learning. So here are some other themes that you can see that have emerged from the literature. So what did I do with all of this? I spent some time learning. So technology has been the foundation of our past 2 years. We've become much more comfortable, more immersed, reliant on it, for the most part comfortable. Accessibility has improved. There's been a fair bit come out about expectations of students and tech integration into the classroom. Technology can also be used to our advantage, especially with the uncertainty of expectations. So synchronous live, remote, hybrid. Technology can create seamless transitions between different learning spaces, which has become so important to reduce that associated stress of the uncertainty and for overall improved delivery. Thoughtful integration of tech can offer the ability to create communities and offer active learning without the reliance of a physical space and physical supplies. One of the amazing tools that can help us do that is with the integration of a product called a HyperDoc. Something similar can be achieved using lots of different platforms, but today I'll focus on the Google Suite. So a HyperDoc just means that it's a reference or support material is embedded into the original or parent document, rather than in separate folders or attachments at the end. So they're becoming pretty common, even things like meeting agendas. The benefit is that they're a package. They're a way to curate instructional content and learning experiences in a way that engages learners. The document's easy to navigate, it's visually stimulating, and it keeps everything organized and in one place. It acts to house the thinking of the session. They also facilitate and foster student collaboration and turn students into the creators of content. How you start to use the tool is where the magic can happen. So, how did I do this? As I started to think about the active lab components, it was intimidating to try and figure out how to reimagine these without scrapping everything and starting again. And even if I did that, where do I start? So unfortunately, this is an example of what my e-class originally looked like. I'm sure many of you have seen this before. right? It's boring, it's unimaginative, it doesn't spark any joy or excitement in me or in the students. And I also needed to consider how to restructure how we were going to explore that content to get the most value added. So focusing on creating different layers of safety. So things like reinforcing and valuing inquiry and courage rather than fear of judgment. So to restructure and to think about these activities, we pulled many ideas from play. We utilized more small groups and created activities that were playoffs of think, pair, share strategies to tackle that student confidence in working with the material. We used others as evolving experts to normalize the role and set the expectations of inquiry as a mechanism of respect for each other rather than something that's punitive, reinforcing that it was a safe space and the growth is in the discussion. The stronger the class, the more each individual will benefit. So to reimagine this content, we focused on active learning with visual appeal. Because let's be honest, if the food looks better, it's probably going to taste better too. So I wanted to package the lab more tightly. I found additional resources I could provide to support universal design and to help students work more efficiently and confidently. I needed a way to manage all of the content as well as the group's processes. I've seen some really interesting ideas with things like escape rooms and other fancy activities, but I felt they might be a bit above my current comfort level and my capacity. And I just wasn't quite sure that it was what I was going for. So after much ado, I ended up creating a hyperdoc inspired by an escape room. So this is where we landed. So I started by making a front page to organize the layout. I wanted to keep everything simple, but also pay attention to that visual appeal. First impressions frame the experience. So the original layout in eClass with the list of attached documents was clean. It was very linear, but it created scattered documents and it was boring. So I made small changes to update the feel of the experience and to hopefully create for the students, they were more inclined to open the module and demonstrate curiosity rather than just shut down from the beginning. So adding visual appeal makes learning fun before you've even started. So here's an example of what I ended up doing. So I took the same content that I originally had, but I repurposed it. So I turned all the documents into collaborative Google Docs with links. I considered and collected a variety of different artifacts that would act as supporting docs along with the actual instruction. So things like videos, web links, images, literature. So this tool is really valuable for incorporating multimodal resources, all of which are important for universal design. So incorporating all of the components inside of the lab. Here's the activities. So they're all housed, they're all collaborative, they're all shared. I can link in files with all of my different content for resources. For my particular content, I can add in all these different supportive tools to help the students work through with more confidence and more autonomy. I can add in peripheral ideas that are not exactly the content, but they're definitely supportive, more visual, more of each of your different senses. And then by adding in one activity sheet, everybody from that group, however I choose to do it, is working off of the same shared space. So along with the visual change, moving from linear links into this type of creation, it also requires the students to click through the document. So it adds different levels of engagement. It's also nice because it allows me as an instructor to create a more on-demand presence. So I can link instructions, either written. I can create little mini 1-minute instructions at appropriate places instead of giving all the instructions at the beginning, which students don't remember what they're supposed to do. They get what they need when they need it with the ability to review if they need it, which then frees me to facilitate the content rather than trying to keep everyone organized or acting more as an administrator. So like we said, it offers the collaborative tool. Everything's in one location and acts to collect the thinking, which can then be used to reflect developed group work. We can compare and contrast group works depending on how you structure it. And it stays within the activity. You don't have to manage how to get the ideas captured or leave the activity empty. So it's great for students who might be unavailable or want to review later. It's a much more complete record. Another benefit, especially going forward, is that it's virtual. It alleviates the challenge of how to deliver the session. It doesn't matter if you're in a room together, if some are remote, some are live, if it's fully remote, everybody can work in the same way. So for this particular lab, I did create a duplicate just in terms of how I wanted to organize my groups. So there's also other ideas to consider introducing into your classroom. Dice are so versatile. They're a quick, easy, fun way to debrief an activity or a class. They're also a great way to pre-brief a class, to check for preparedness, or to use as a recall and retrieval activity. So this is a template from Gold.edu. There's tons of styles and opportunities. The templates are all pre-built and available, which is nice. Again, I'm not rethinking all of my activities. I'm exploring different ways to deliver them in a more intentional way. You could also consider incorporating some friendly competition or adding elements of call a friend or offer a hint to protect that psychological safety, depending on what you're going for in your space. You have the option to look at using real dice, but again, if we're digital, that can sometimes be challenging. So there's also different extensions. So this one, for example, it's just a Google extension, and it does it all right inside of your Chrome browser, so you never even have to leave. So another interesting and easy thing is a choice board. So this is an example of an option to recreate a retrieval practice activity. Again, it's a template. I do have resources at the end, so if anyone's interested in exploring further, you're free to take a look, adapt as you see. It's essentially a hyperdoc, and it incorporates each of the different things that you want, either instructions, supports, however it may be. This is one that I actually added into an assignment that I did. So all students are responsible for the same learning, but I stepped back to allow them to demonstrate responsibility for their learning by creating a more authentic to them artifact or product. I really liked this because it gave the learner the autonomy to meet the assignment objectives in a way that was meaningful to them. We know one of the barriers we know one of the barriers to learning is creating to please or creating just for marks. This format doesn't change the assignment or the objectives, but it plays into that intrinsic motivation and allows the students to engage in a different way. As a note, I was really impressed with the quality and the creativity of some of the work that I got back when they got to design how they demonstrated that. They all achieved the objectives, but they presented back in ways that never would have occurred to me. So I'll definitely use this tool again. So how did everything work out? I don't have data. I didn't measure anything. I can only report back based on discussions with students, anecdotal feedback, and my own observations. Overall, I would consider this first attempt a great success. Students engaged much more effectively with this foundational approach. There was often laughter and a buzz in the room. I was able to come into a group to facilitate the discussion or add to it, rather than coaxing a response out, which was a huge relief for me. In large group discussions, groups were able to demonstrate inquiry and engagement by asking complex or nonlinear questions of their peers, and then brainstorming collaboratively if an answer wasn't offered. So this demonstration of psychological safety, in my opinion, is essential in order to highly value that critical thought and then collaboration to learn more. So these examples demonstrate the shift into intrinsic motivation that's so important for learners, especially as this is a professional program. So in these content-heavy, high-stakes courses, there can be significant ramifications if students don't learn. I believe that play-based philosophies, along with playful active learning strategies, supported student success by changing the dynamic to create relational safety and helped remove barriers to learning. The pandemic and push forwards into full integrated technology has really allowed me to dig into my own educational philosophies and further explore curriculum design. The opportunity has normalized the need to rethink all aspects of what you're doing and challenge those norms or traditions. I'm sure that many of you are doing amazing things that have far surpassed me. But for those of us who tend to be a bit more hesitant, not necessarily the early adopters, we can still begin to interject some of these ideas too. We all know that out of disruption comes innovation, and I believe that small continual steps and a willingness to try will produce vast rewards for both us and for our students. Thank you very much for your time.